Crusaders. I am Brooke Plack, your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast. And I'm so excited that you've chosen to spend the next half hour or so with me as we dive into getting real in the trenches of life, relationships, and business, which is what the Grit Crusade podcast was originally about. And is what we seek to tackle with either myself with really fun topics or the amazing guests that we have on here today. So or not today, but have on here some days, because today you're just stuck with me. And if it's your first time, then welcome. And if you're returning, welcome back. So we are in the midst of a multi-part little mini series, my first mini series I've done, called Work Life Flow. So you may have heard the term work-life balance or wished on that term or hoped one day you could get there. But for me, everything in life is about seasons and creating a flow that feels good and feels right to you. So I think it's something very important for me to start this episode with is that your flow is unique and individual to you. So what I say is my work-life flow may not work for you. And that's okay, because each one of our lives is different, individual, and completely unique. And that's what makes the world a special place. And so I don't want you to take any of the information I say as this is what you should be doing. This is how it should look for you. But this is more about me sharing tips and stories and things I've learned along the way that have helped my journey be a little bit easier. And sometimes things I'm in the middle of that are still hard for me. And hopefully that will help you to be more intentional about the choices you make for your life and your decisions. So we started with, give you a little backstory here. Well, before I start talking about the first episode in this series, I want to give you even more of a backstory about why I wanted to do this, workflow series. So probably if I was a super organized podcaster, maybe I would have started this on the first of the episodes. But somehow for me, it just feels more natural to kind of give you little pieces as we go. And so about 10 years ago, I started teaching cheerleading lessons out of my garage. And that quickly snowballed into me leaving my full-time career as a public school teacher and moving into small business entrepreneurship. And so through that transition and process, I became very overwhelmed, very burned out, exhausted, fatigued, tired, and just made a decision for myself when I had my son 5 years ago of there's a better way. We can do this and this. We can live in that tension of success right here and family. I can make both happen. And I don't know how, but I know that's what I want to do. And so that is how this journey started for me. And so, really, about 5 years ago, I started being a lot more intentional about the decisions I was making in my life for myself, for my business, and for this flow of how I wanted my life to go. And sometimes it's not things that we can change overnight. And that's okay, because a lot of the best decisions that we make, we are slow, small, intentional steps in the right direction. So nothing I say on this podcast is rip the Band-Aid and do it off right now, except maybe like one thing in our agenda for today is, and you may disagree with me, and I'm okay with that too. And if you ever have feedback on the topics that we're talking about, if you're watching on YouTube, please drop them in the comments. That getting feedback from our listeners and viewers is how I'm able to connect with you. Or you can shoot me an email, especially if you're listening on a podcast, your favorite streaming platform like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Play. You can email me at chat@brookeplack.com. And that allows us to have some time to have dialogue together too. And I love that. So that gives you a little backstory of why this work-life flow is so important to me and how it's transformed my life. And so I broke it into a little 5-part mini series of 5 areas that I felt like were the most important to emphasize. If you've been listening for a while, you've probably heard me talk about Michael Hyatt and the Full Focus Company. And they have an assessment called the Life Score Assessment. And it actually has 8 parts of your life on it. So on that assessment, which we'll link in the show notes, it talks about hobbies, body, mind, spirit, love, family, community, money, and work. Actually, I think that's 9 instead of 8. So, and all of those things are very important. But the 5 topics that I've chosen to dive into, and this is topic 4. So this is episode 4. So if you want to go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3, we'll be sure and link those in the show notes too. But our first topic that we started about with mind and body, and I kind of grouped those two together. Then we dove into friends and social life, which was a topic I had to be very vulnerable about with you guys because I am an introverted extrovert, and so that looks different for everybody, and it doesn't mean that your social life needs to look like mine, it needs to look like someone else's. And then the last episode we talked about was spirituality and how that is different from church and very, innate and important to our universal human experience on earth. And today we're going to dive into the topic of personal finance. So this may be an episode you actually want to skip, but I promise it's one that you don't want to miss because this is a part of our lives that so many times we shy away from. But if we can just lean into that and take control of what's going on in that part of our life, at least having a little bit of strategy and guidance, it can open up so many doors for us. So I was recently in Franklin, Tennessee. It's like a little Hallmark town, or as one of the guys I was at this business training with called it, like Mayberry, like posh Mayberry, right? Bougie Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show. And while I was in Franklin, the last training I went to was called Avoid Money Mistakes. And so it was talking specifically about business finance. And the speaker, his name is John Putman. He wrote a book called He Spends, She Spends. And the training was not surrounded necessarily around that book, but he was a fabulous speaker. And one of the quotes from the training I think is applicable to both business and personal finance. And it says this: while financial chaos creates scarcity, financial control creates freedom. So even though our finances can be scary and we have so many emotions tied to them, right? There's a reason why people don't want to talk about money because it is extremely emotional. For some of us, we are scared because or fearful because we don't have enough. Or maybe we're shame. We feel shame because we know we're not doing a good job managing it. Or maybe we feel embarrassed because we have more than enough money, like we have more than we need. But it's something that's tied very real to our money story that we've grown up with and our childhood roots and how our families managed money that leans over into our generation and the next generation. And I'm a firm believer that we are our own responsibility. And so we get to decide what that story looks like moving forward for our lives, for our children's lives, for our friends and family that we may leave our inheritance to or our estates to. Because no matter what happens, when you die, the people that care about you have to deal with your shit. And what that looks like is totally up to us. And so, even though death's not our topic today, our human existence is what this workflow is about. And so, having control of our finances makes us not only have a calmer, less anxious, less stressful life, but it helps us make decisions, intentional decisions about how we want to spend our time and our influence and leave an impact. Because if you are someone that finds yourself in a place with excess money, there are things you can do with that money besides just spend it. Okay. Investing in future generations, giving to nonprofits and churches that you're passionate about. I give away 15% of all of my money every single month because I am in a season of my life of financial abundance. And I'm not saying I'm a millionaire. I'm not saying I'm the wealthiest person on the planet, but we live simply and have more than we need. And so giving back to the things I care about is super important to me. And for me, that looks like tithing in my church. And that looks like supporting the nonprofit I co founded, the Impact One Foundation, and giving back to other charitable causes in one time donation forms, as well as supporting my big kitty cats that I love at the Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge. So if you watched Tiger King and you loved the whole story there, Carol from Tiger King, they have now closed down the big cat refuge in southern Florida, and all those cats are relocating to Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge in Eureka Springs. So that's a cause that I'm passionate about. Do I give them thousands of dollars? No. But do I give them hundreds of dollars a year? Yes, because I care about them. And so there are ways that we can work through these very intense emotions that we have surrounding money and knowing that it can become a healthy relationship. And so today we're specifically going to talk about personal finances. And yes, there are great tools out there. Personal financial planners. There are tons of books. There are, people that you can hire to handle this for you. In today's episode, we're going to just tackle things that you can personally do, like in the next day or two. So just small things that you can do and changes you can make. And I'm going to share a tool with you guys that I've built that I use to manage my personal finances and that works really well for me. Okay. But first, if you're new here, we have a fun segment called Trivia in the Trenches that we do every episode. So if I have a guest here, I will ask the guest the question and I like to stump them. We've had a few get the questions right. But if it's just me and you, like it is today here on the podcast, then I ask you, but I try not to give you enough time to be able to Google it and look up the answer. Okay. And so today's topic is rather fun and funny, especially if you're like me and you grew up in the 80s and 90s. So here we go. Trivia in the trenches. What was the name of Dr. Evil's cat in Austin Powers? Dun, 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 dun. Mr. Bigglesworth. I love that name. It makes me think of like Wigglesworth, but it's actually Bigglesworth. But anyway, so here's a few other fun facts about Austin Powers, the movies that you may not have known. That Mike Myers originally created the character Austin Powers for a band. It wasn't for a movie. It was like a 60s, not in the 60s, obviously, but like a 60s themed band. And the character was created for that. And Michael Myers, if you've seen the movies, you probably know that he also plays Austin Powers while simultaneously playing Dr. Evil. But it wasn't originally planned that way. He wanted Jim Carrey to play Dr. Evil, but Jim Carrey was busy in the with filming Liar Liar, which is a family movie with the claw. Like I feel like our generation grew up knowing what the claw was, like tickling kids, and this, like some of the people probably think it's really weird, like in the 20 years or so. So then Michael Myers talk about a man knowing what he wants. Like if I can't have Jim Carrey, then I'm going to do it myself, and he did. So he ended up playing double duty in there. But this is the most fascinating fact of the whole Trivia in the Trenches segment today. The real cat's name. So this cat, if you haven't seen it, you have to Google it. The cat is like, looks like it's been shaved, right? But it's actually a sphinx cat, is I believe what they're called. And so it's a type of hairless cat. And so the cat's real name, Mr. Bigglesworth, is his screen name, but his real name is Ted Nugent, but it's spelled nude gent, like Nudegent. So the cat's a hairless cat that's a nude gent. So whether you're a Ted Nugent fan or not, there you go. There's your Trivia in the Trenches segment for today. All right. So talking about this concept of personal finance and how we can not only address these feelings that we're having about our personal finances, but how we can take some more control and to go from this chaotic feeling to being able to feel like we can make more decisions and have freedom around our finances. Okay. So the first thing, before I start telling you the few tips that really just two that have really worked for me, there's tons of research out there. You can get really deep on this, but I prefer to keep it simple when it comes to finances because it is overwhelming. But there are a few mental barriers I want to talk about before we talk about some things that you can do to kind of combat those. All right. And the first mental barrier that we have to acknowledge is boredom. So for some people, dealing with finances and numbers is just boring. They just want the money to be there and they don't want to have to think about it. Okay. Again, you are your own responsibility in this world. So boredom could be a mental barrier you're facing, but it's something that we have to look at of what do we want more? Do we want to have control and freedom over our finances, or do we want to live in this state of chaos? The next mental barrier that we might be facing is overwhelm. Maybe it's overwhelming to you. Maybe you're someone who's never dealt with finances, or maybe you had a spouse or a parent that always managed your finances, and now that person is no longer in your life. They're no longer there to take care of it for you, and now you have to do it, but it feels so big that you're telling yourself the story of, I can't do this anymore, or I can no longer handle this, or this is too much for me, or Maybe I'm not smart enough. I'm not a numbers person. But the reality is it's actually very simple and you can do it. You just have to start to reframe that story in your head. So you do need to open the overdraft notices that come in the mail and look at the bank statements and look at the interest you're earning, because this life is one trip for you and you get one chance to make it your responsibility. So you can find yourself very bored by it, very overwhelmed by it, or complacent, which is somewhere in the middle, of I have enough money and everything's fine, just trucking along doing our thing. But the reality is you could be making a greater impact in your life, making greater investments, making greater decisions if you were moving away from complacency and becoming an advocate for yourself and your personal finances. Because if you aren't being intentional, you'll probably just be ordering on Amazon. I've been there. The house that we live in now is like a very old 1904 home. And so it's like 3,600 square feet, 4,000 square feet, somewhere around there. And that seems like a huge home in most parts of the world. And it is. It's a huge old home. I lived in a brand new, smaller home for 7 years before this. So we went from 1,400 square feet to almost 4,000 square feet. And it was like I was just shopping all the time because I needed to fill the space. But I wasn't intentional about what I was buying. I was just buying stuff because I had room to put stuff. And then I found myself, A, looking at my Amazon receipts and realizing I was spending way too much money on Amazon. And B, not living in a house with things that brought me joy or that I found useful or loved. And so now I'm kind of in this like backtracking thing of like getting rid of stuff that doesn't bring me joy, that I don't love, that's not useful to us, and purposefully refilling our home with things we love. And so that's one of the things I'll talk about, in future podcast episodes more. But you could have this overwhelm, this boredom, this complacency, and also I mentioned earlier, shame or fear. And so the fear that you are never going to have enough, or feeling ashamed that you haven't dealt with this sooner. That's okay if you are feeling any of those feelings, because I promise you, other listeners and me included have all found ourselves at those spots. And once you acknowledge this is where I'm at. So my challenge to you is, are you feeling complacent about your finances? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Acknowledge that. And then say to yourself, so now what? Now what are you going to do? Okay? Because it's the next step is what matters. Life is not great. You don't become great by making great, huge steps all the time. It's those tiny little steps in the right direction that add up over time that make a big difference in our lives. Okay? So you may find yourself in one of those spots, and that's okay. Acknowledge it. Maybe take some time to figure out where it is. For some of us, it may jump out at you which one it is. And then let's talk about the next tips and the next steps to get us in the right direction. So, these are a few things that have worked for me. And I'm only going to give you two simple tips today because it's a big world out there and it can get really overwhelming. And I want to keep it simple so that you know that you can start making steps today or tomorrow in the right direction with your finances. All right. So, step one is to create a budget. All right. Don't roll your eyes at me. Don't sit here and turn off the podcast. This is the point where you have to acknowledge your responsibility and keep listening. Okay. Create a budget. It can be on paper. It can be a fancy app. Mint.com, MINT, is made by Intuit, the QuickBooks company. And they have a free personal finance app you can use. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole you can go down. I use a spreadsheet, simple spreadsheet. And how you create a budget is what's coming in and what's going out. Okay. That's all you need to know. What kind of income do you have coming in? So if it's a spreadsheet, and I'm going to share I'm going to share my spreadsheet tool. Say that 5 times fast. Share my spreadsheet tool. Share my spreadsheet tool with you in the show notes that I personally use. It will be a Google file. So you will need to click, when you open the Google spreadsheet, you will need to click File, Make a Copy, because you won't be able to edit the one I'm going to share with you. So File, Make a Copy is how, and then you'll be able to fill in your numbers. So maybe you have one income stream, maybe you have 2 income streams, maybe you have 10. I don't know. whatever that looks like, you're going to put that on your income column, or if you're using a piece of paper, your income, and then you're going to list out all of your expenses that you have every month. Okay. Don't be embarrassed. This is the only person seeing this is you. Okay. Do not be embarrassed by this. Be real with yourself. What are your actual expenses? All right. And we're going to talk about when those two numbers don't add up in just a second. So create a budget, figuring out what comes in and what goes out. On the what goes out column, there are two things that I'm going to give you some advice on. Number one, cancel your damn subscriptions. You do not need a subscription to Hulu, HBO, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Paramount Network, or Plus, whichever one you subscribe to. You do not need all of those things all the time. If you're watching a show, get the subscription, then cancel the subscription and roll on. Okay. There is some, sharing subscriptions is not something you can do as much anymore. So that's not like a tip I can give you now that used to work. But cancel all your subscriptions. Cancel all those app subscriptions. Go through your app store. What are your subscriptions? Go through your Amazon, reoccurring subscriptions, push them out, fine tune them. Subscriptions are a giant moneymaker for companies that oftentimes we don't need. And I'm not saying don't have any, but figure out where your money is going and put a stop to it. You can always re-sign back up, okay? And the next thing is quit eating out. So if you are needing to trim expenses, cut your subscriptions and quit eating out. You're like, what am I going to eat if I don't eat out? Go on Pinterest, find a free recipe, eat some vegetables for the love of Pete. Like, you don't have to be a great cook to not eat out. Sometimes places have local meal prep services, or you can do like those boxed services, HelloFresh or one of those kind of things. Like, you do not have to be eating out every single meal. And if you're like, but I don't have time to cook, then you need to go back to my other episodes and look at managing your time. Okay. Because this is your life. It's your responsibility. Now, you have all the money in the world. You're not complaining about how much money you have, and you want to eat out, eat out. I'm not saying don't ever eat out, but those are two big things, two big categories that can help trim those expenses really quickly. Okay. Now, after you've created your budget, you have what's coming in and what's going out listed. Okay. The power of the next thing I'm going to tell you will change your personal finances forever. Find your wiggle room and decide what you're going to do with it. Okay, so here are your income and your expenses. It is this simple, guys. All the books you read, all the tips, I'm not saying they're wrong, but if you cannot master these basic things, none of that's going to do you any good. Income, expenses, find your wiggle room and figure out what to do with it. Okay, so in that wiggle room, you really have two choices. Your debt snowball, which is something that Dave Ramsey teaches in the Total Money Makeover, which we'll have linked in the show notes, or what I call your goal snowball. Okay, so if you have debt that needs to be paid off, especially high interest debt, then you are going to want to create a snowball that Dave Ramsey outlines in his book and teaches you how to start with your smallest debt first and pay off all your debt. I have found myself in this debt snowball in two critical places in my life. Okay. In 2015, in January, I had heart surgery. In July, I had shoulder surgery. I was a public school teacher and I had a high deductible insurance plan. I left with $18,000 in medical bills that I had to figure out how to pay off on a public school teacher's salary and a very small income for my new business, which is now my self-employment. And so I have been there. I have worked those medical bills. I've done that. On the flip side, okay, so there's that. I get all my stuff paid off. I'm now working on a goal snowball. And then I have my son. He was a NICU baby. Our single person health insurance deductible goes to a double person health insurance in November of 2017. And I leave the hospital again, as you guessed it, with $18,000 in medical bills again. So this is something that even though you may not be there right now, you may have to go back in season. And then you have to look at how am I going to pay those off, okay? The next thing is now I don't have any more debt. Or maybe your house is on such a low interest rate that you don't want to pay your house off, okay? Some of us refinanced, like me, in the middle of the pandemic. Rates were at like 2 or 3%, and you're not really interested in paying your house off. That does not align with Dave Ramsey's teachings. This is what, remember, like I said, everybody's journey is different. And you find yourself in a goal snowball situation. Okay. So before I talk about the goal snowball, I want to put a little interjection in here and say, if you're going, but what if I don't have any wiggle room? I'm about to talk about that. Okay. So hold tight. Okay. So we have our debt snowball. And now we are at a goal snowball. What is a goal snowball? A goal snowball is when you find yourself in a situation where you no longer have any debt to pay off. You've decided how much money you're going to save every month, and you want to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your money, because time and money are very similar in that if you don't tell it where to go, it will go where it wants to go or where someone else wants it to go. So now if you find yourself in a situation where you've got some wiggle room, you've got all your debt paid off, and now you've got some extra money, it will find its way out that door on Amazon orders, paying for stuff for your grown kids, biggest siphon ever of money. They are adults, unless they are special needs and they can work, let them work and figure it out. Trust me. But if you don't be intentional about that money, you'll never know where it went. So deciding, maybe you're someone like me who I decided, you know what? I want to have $100,000 cash in the bank. That's right. I do. And when I made that statement to myself, I didn't have anywhere close to $100,000 cash in the bank. But it takes small intentional steps in the right directions to get there. And so I'm still on that journey, but I have a date. If I put this much in savings every month from now until then, I'm going to have that in the bank. Woohoo! Am I putting every last extra dollar I have in there to get there? No, because the goal is for no one but me. I'm going to be the only one that knows when I hit that and if I choose to share that with anybody. Maybe you want to spend money adding landscaping to your house, like me. I moved into an old house. We have no landscaping. I'd like to put some irrigation in and some plants out front. And I want to figure out how much money do I have to do that with. So the spreadsheet tool that I built for you guys makes this very, very simple. So when you go on there, it has auto calculating formulas in there, and you'll put in your income, you'll put in your expenses, and it will show you at the end of each month, okay, how much money it is that you're going to have left to spend on these other things or wiggle room things, right? And for that debt or goal snowball. So at that point, when you have this extra money, you can decide, like, I want to put extra money into investments. I want to put extra money into my child's college fund. I want to put money into, I don't know, buying a new car or repainting my house or whatever it is you want to do. It's your money, it's your life. But this goes back to the point that I talked about at the very beginning. The quote that John Putnam shared at our training was let me go back and look at my notes. Hold on. I want to make sure I say it right because this was important. While financial chaos creates scarcity, financial control creates freedom. Okay. So now you find yourself in a place where you have the freedom to decide, now what am I going to do with this money? Maybe you want to go acquire some debt by buying a camper or a boat or whatever it is. But now you know what you can afford and you know the difference in having that chaotic feeling and that feeling of financial freedom, because you don't have to live in the chaos of being overwhelmed or bored or complacent about your money anymore. Okay. All right. So that is great and fine. But what if you're somebody that's listened to this point and find yourself going, but what if I don't have any wiggle room? I'm a single mom. I'm supporting an elderly parent. I have recently taken out a second mortgage because we couldn't make ends meet. What if you're someone that finds yourself there? Okay. I'm going to tell you what I'm about to say is not all roses. And I know that, but it is the facts. Okay. Number one, you're living beyond your means. Okay. That could be one of the reasons that you don't have wiggle room. That doesn't mean that's your reason, but that could be a reason. If you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe I'm like overgeneralizing here, but living with buying luxury goods all the time is not normal. You do not need big fancy purses and cars and houses and all of that to make you seem cool, okay? If you want to take some cool pictures on Instagram, go rent a bag. There are companies that let you rent stuff for photo shoots. You don't have to buy all these things. So you may just be living beyond your means. And that may look like you having to have a hard conversation with yourself or your family and go, we can't live here anymore. We can't do this anymore. We can't take that vacation. We need to put a pause on spending for a little bit. Okay. That could be a reason you don't have any wiggle room. Maybe you needed to redefine what you need. If you're listening on podcast, not watching the video, I'm doing air quotes here. Need, because what we think we need in a very affluent, fortunate society is very different than what needs are defined in third world countries. You don't need that fancy makeup from Ulta, and you don't need those brand new Nike sneakers. Okay, those are not needs. Those are wants. You can put that into your shopping budget if you want to. But again, we're back here talking about to the people that are like, but what if I don't have any wiggle room? Your job is to create that wiggle room by paring down your spending habits and figuring out, where is this money going and what can I do about it? Okay. All right. So maybe the spending is the issue, or maybe you need to retool and find a new income stream. There is no reason to live broke in 2023 and beyond. With the advent of technology, we can all retool and create additional revenue streams. You can create content creation. You can do marketing for people. You can learn how to run an e-commerce store that you built yourself. There is YouTube training for free. There are plenty of sites out there. There are courses you can buy for $49, $99 that actually, truly, they're not all scams. A lot of them are genuinely teaching you how to do or learn or be something different, okay? You can sell on Amazon. You can sell on Etsy. You can sell on eBay. You can buy and resell stuff at yard sales. Like, there are so many ways to make extra money that living broke is something that you can get out of. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, but nothing worth having is easy. Okay. And so the last one is like my personal favorite tool when I start to feel like that my budget's getting a little tight. So I use my spreadsheet, but I'm human. And sometimes I realize I've been spending a little bit of money. And so anyone who's friends with me on Facebook or follows me on Facebook knows I start to sell stuff I don't need. So we all have so many things around our house that we don't need: furniture, home decor, clothes, shoes. And yes, some of those things do go to donations in our world, but some of them are like brand new. And I don't want everything going into a landfill. And so I will sell them on Facebook. I'll sell them on Marketplace. I sell on Mercari. I sell on eBay. So start looking around your house for the things that you don't need and sell them. And that's one of the great ways that Dave Ramsey teaches, to start with that debt snowball. But once you find yourself out of debt, you don't have to quit being frugal. You can still be responsible with your, material things. And I sell stuff when I'm about to go on vacation, because it's extra spending money. And why not? It's something that someone else is getting at a great deal that I no longer need. And that is one of the most sustainable things we can do. In elementary school, they teach us reduce, reuse, recycle. And so as you're starting to give your belongings away or sell them, that helps create a whole lot more wiggle room in your life. And so I hope today that through listening to this personal finance podcast has helped you know that it's okay if yours looks different. You don't have to have the same budget as mine. You don't have to want to give away 15% of your income. You could give away 40%. I don't know, 80%, whatever that looks like to you. But you are in control of these decisions and you can be intentional about them. So the last concept, which I think is the best concept I've ever learned, that my dad used to always tell me, that his dad, my Grand Ray, told him was, if you make $2 million a year and you spend $3 million a year, you're broke. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Plack. Our theme song is Thunder City by Lunar Ray, licensed through Soundstripe. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.